My name's Dom Beken, and I write and record and produce music. We have some bands who I'm in and work with. I have a band with Alex Paterson called High Frequency Bandwidth, and we have just finished writing an album which we are mixing at the moment, and a band with Anthony Adams who I work with called Beken and a band with the aforementioned Alex I play in sometimes called The Orb. And before that we had a band called Transit Kings, which was myself and the said Alex. There seems to be a lot of things with him, and a guy called Jimmy Corty who is in the KLF, and Guy Pratt who is a very talented bass player and has played with just about everybody including Pink Floyd.
So tell us more about your project with Alex, High Frequency Band.
That kind of grew out of Transit Kings because as Transit Kings progressed, it ended up being concentrated down to a production team of Alex and I, and the album got quite a good reception. People seemed to really like it, and we wanted to take it on further, but what we really wanted to do was to record an album that made the most of putting a DJ producer together with a musician and producer, and so we both have a great love of hip-hop, so the idea was really to try and concentrate what we were doing into something that was much more hip-hop influenced.
Do you sample?
We do, but it's a lot less sample based than the Orb originally was, and I think the Orb even now is a lot less sample based than it was, just because the technology that's available to create music easily in the studio is so much better than it ever was. So we've now got the ability to take samples that we really like and to put together collages of stuff which are full of influences that we really like, but then to go back and recreate those sounds in our way as well, which puts a new twist on them. So obviously, I mean, it's really heavily influenced by samples, but it's not as sample based as it was. There's still some sneaky things put in there, but you can now manage to take a source sound in the same way you'd take even a treated piano and take it so far away from the original sound. You can do the same thing with samples from somebody else's record and take it to a point where almost the source material is irrelevant, except as a starting point for your idea for the writing.
And so what are some of the more unusual techniques that you use then to process sounds? And
I don't think anything's unusual now, because so few people come from the same background that I come from a background of being trained, you know, in a proper studio on tape with an SSL and doing proper recording, that people are taking stuff from wherever and processing it in a laptop. So I don't know, I don't think there is anything. I don't think there is any such thing as unconventional anymore. The only thing I like about the way we've set up the studio here is that there's as much, although it's computer based, there's as much analogue as possible. And I mean, the latest thing we did was to build a big patch base so I can plug anything into anything else. So it's all the channels open and all the effects units and whatever toys you've got available open with an input to them to chuck stuff into and muck around with it until something comes out that you like. Fortunately, because of what's available and because people have changed their expectations of what they expect to see live, the live shows for all of the acts we're involved in can kind of grow and shrink depending on the budget and the size of the venue and what we're doing. You know, some of the shows, hopefully for High Frequency Bandwidth, will be a 7-piece band playing all the parts. Some of them will be really based on computer sequencing stuff with lots of overdubs, but the one thing that will hold them all together is that we'll never go on stage and just play to a backing track or even just play to a multi-track in Logic that we just mix. If we go out, we'll go out with something like Ableton Live plus analog samplers plus synths, and instead of using Ableton Live like a multi-track, it will be something which is where everything is broken down into constituent bar or 2-bar parts that can be looped, can be repeated, can be flipped backwards and forwards. In fact, 3 of the tracks in the HFB album came directly out of live jams that we recorded in the studio for podcasts. We quite often do like an actual live show in the studio and put it out as a podcast. And one of the tracks came from a recording that was taken of a live show we did at Fuji Rock in Japan, where you go back and you listen to it and you think, what was that sample you threw in? That's insane. And then I'd taken drums that I'd had, some drum parts and some keyboard parts that I'd had lying around thinking this would be nice, and had been in a situation where a certain groove, a certain beat was working so well that we just chucked them in and gone back and listened to it. Wow, that's the start of a track. So a lot of the tracks come out of live jams, and that's the way we work always in the studio anyway, is having everything open, and usually 16 or 24 tracks in record anyway, and all the synths in the studio live and Alex's decks and chaos pads and various outboard effects and sequencers and what have you, and just start from that point jamming and just taking everything as multi-tracks and making sure you don't lose anything that anybody does, and then go back and review. And usually that way each day you will come up with two or three new tracks.
Would you say that your studio is mainly analogue then? Do you use much software?
I'd like it to be more analogue than it is. The real problem that you have these days is that a lot of what we do, you need to be able to recall it very, very quickly. We need to have so many projects ongoing simultaneously that it wouldn't really be possible to do a session the way we did it when I first started, where you would have the desk set for a certain mix and then do an old-fashioned recall of all the outboard gear, and to bring a track back would mean 2 or 3 hours recalling the session. Things need to be able to come back as quickly as possible, so what I try and do is just marry the two together, so that, okay, the vast majority of the automation is computer-based, and obviously the recording medium is mostly computer-based, although we've got a 16-track analog machine as well. And then everything else apart from that is analog. But a lot of the analog stuff ends up having to be printed. We tend to use BFD a lot as well, because the nice thing about that, again, is recallability you were talking about, and the other great thing about it is access to so many different drum kits. You can simply use it the way that I would have recorded drums had we had the budgets to constantly be at Townhouse, RIP, or Olympic or Air or Abbey Road, where I would have gone and decided on a drum kit, put it in a room, mic'd it up with the mics that I wanted, and had a drummer there to do the session and then printed it in Pro Tools or whatever, or gone down to tape with it. And the nice thing about BFD is that it means that even in our studio you've got access to a whole wide variety of different drum kits, and being a drummer, it's nice to be able to play them live from a V drum kit as well, so you can stick to having the feel of live drums, or you can go back and move individual hits if you want to. And then the nice thing about it is, especially with film or TV work or with ad works, if you have a drum part that people like, but the edit changes at the last minute, you're not talking about going back and recreating the whole drum session again to re-record the drum parts to fit around the new edit of the picture. If I've got a drum tape that I really like, it's so much more editable to go back to the original MIDI parts than to go back in and actually having to slice audio and try and keep the feel the same and do crossfades and all the rest of it. So as a tool like that, it's really invaluable. It's very, very useful indeed. I like the fact that I can start from a point which is not too far away from how I'd mic a kit myself for most applications, and to have it actually coming up on 10 or 16 channels on the desk as if it was the kit in the room. I mean, it's I've got to say, it's pretty close. And you can start then to go back and do a lot of the tricks of processing that you would have done had you had a real drummer in the room. You can go back and do those with BFD in the same way. And you can then obviously print off what you've done. I tend to print off what I've done in BFD as audio, but in stems of 16 tracks, with each mic printed separately. So the only thing I miss from it is being able to do those drum takes where you go down to one mic. But I mean, God knows how you do that in a multi-sample drum kit. Sometimes it would be nice just to put a drummer in a room and put 1 or 2 mics on them. But this is a great way of working, just for being able to change drum kits really quickly, being able to change mic setups really quickly, and it's incredibly flexible for that. I mean, I've got 2 or 3 different setups that are basic kit setups that I'll start from, and then generally speaking for each song go through and tune bass drums and tune snares and change individual kit pieces depending on what suits the song. But I normally tend to start from a palette of probably 4 basic kits for 4 basic different styles, just for putting ideas straight down, which saves so much time sitting and looking through loops or looking through other sample libraries, because you can start with a drum kit that's more or less in the area of what you want, and if you know what you're doing you can process it to sound the way you want it to sound. And it's nice just being able to adjust the tuning for snares, especially for kicks, so they fit in with bass tracks. Unlike any other drum production tool I've come across, you can have each individual mic on a kit and see what it sounds like and really experiment with processing that in your own way. So it's quite a kind of open architecture for creativity with your drum sounds, in that you really can take the actual raw audio of a real recording and start to process it and start to try and replicate some of the sounds that you might have heard on records that you really like, even if you don't have access to a great live room and a drum kit and a great drummer. I think that's the nicest thing about it, is you can start with wanting, for example, to replicate John Bonham's drum sound on Led Zeppelin records, for example, which we've done recently on a record, where you might have been stuck with a sample before and with his parts, but what you really want is that crunched up drum sound, that enormous, great big fat middle that you get on those recordings, and the compressors stepping on the cymbals to really give it that kind of crunch that works so well on hip hop stuff. And with something like BFD, you've got the raw elements there to do that. The only limitation is your creativity and your ability to use plugins and to use your outboard on it the way you want to get the sound out of it you want. It's not one of those tools that says, these are my presets, this is what I sound like, this is the limit of what you can do with me. It's kind of it's nice because it's a professional's tool, but it has shortcuts in it as well. If you want to load a preset, you can go straight to some nice sounding drums just to put something down quickly.
What's the piece of music that changed your life?
Oh, I hate that question.
What inspired you to start writing?
I don't think any piece of music changes your life.
In the early days.
Probably Isaiah Tomita's version of Holst the Planets. It's the only opening to a record that really does sound like your hi-fi's broken, and it has an ability that punk never had to drive my father completely insane with a piece of music that he loved. Apart from that, I don't know. There's so many. There's so many. This is a Desert Island Discs question, and I spent so long trying to work out, if I ever got on Desert Island Discs, what my Desert Island Disc would actually be, that I ended up concluding that what I'd asked them to do is to take the output of Desert Island Discs and plug it back to the input of Desert Island Discs, because what I really would want to hear would be me on Desert Island Discs, because I've been thinking about it so much, what my Desert Island Discs would actually be, until I realised that what would happen would be just the most enormous ear-splitting feedback on Radio 4. And then I thought, actually, that would be what I'd like to hear, so, yeah. I've been thinking about this too much.
What else have you got lined up for the rest of the year?
This year, in terms of high-profile stuff, is quiet for us because the High Frequency Bandwidth album has to be finished and the Beken and Alex album has to be finished. But there is a remix of the Orb's Beautiful Day, which I've just done with Chris Needs, which I'm hoping will be out on the B-side of the 12-inch of Beautiful Day, and there is a Beken and Alex remix of Dirty Disco Dub from the Orb, which will be out again on the B-side of Dirty Disco Dub, and there will be a taster 12-inch of High Frequency Bandwidth called High Flying Birds, with remixes from Vin 100 and 3 other artists, which is coming out on Pushing Plastic. And there is a Malicious Damage compilation coming out called The Clock Machine Turns You On Volume 2 on Malicious Damage Records, which will have another High Frequency Bandwidth track on. It will have an exclusive track from Beken and Alex and stuff from the most amazing artists that are on Malicious Damage, including Beat Under Control, the Sun Paolo, who are just amazing, Cain and Abel, whose track Soul Clap is brilliant, and Root Masters, and some other people I've probably forgotten who'll kill me, but yeah, check that out. High Frequency Bandwidth will be on tour and doing festivals next year, and so will Beken and Alex. So for this year it's a quiet studio year, I'm afraid.
Cool.
And just our adverts on the telly.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Can you give us a good recipe? Simple, quick and tasty.
I would say carpaccio of beef, made with beef from the Fine Beef Company from a farm in Little Kings Hill. and I would take a most unusual cut, which is feather steak, which is usually a stewing steak, and actually from Longhorn beef, which are a very rare breed and slow growing breed, feather steak is incredibly tender and very tasty, and you simply slice it thinly and serve with a vinaigrette and salad. Delicious.